Friends, before we start kneading the clay, I want to remind you of the super importance of preparing the clay. Our clay needs to be at the right moisture level, very soft in our case, and uniform. We adjust the moisture before we start kneading, but we achieve uniformity during the kneading process. We'll be using a table for kneading. There are several important parameters for this table. First of all, the height of the table, the height of the surface, and the quality of the surface itself. The height of the table will also depend on your height, and you can adjust the table height individually. For me, a good surface for kneading looks something like this. I'm standing so. My feet are touching the edge of the table and I'm lowering my hands. Here are my hands. My fingers are touching the surface of the table. The edge of the table and lowering my hands. Here are my hands. My fingers are touching the surface of the table. If the table is a bit higher, let's say if I'm standing and can place my palms flat on the table while keeping my back straight. This surface is also acceptable for me. And this is roughly the range. I would suggest you choose the height of the surface where you plan to knead the clay. The most important thing for us is the center of gravity. The center of gravity is with us. 4 fingers from the navel down. And the center of gravity should be significantly higher than the surface of the table. If we knead the clay like this, the center of gravity is below the surface of the table, and we'll have to use physical strength from our arms. But when our center of gravity is elevated above the surface, we can use our body weight for that. And when our center of gravity is elevated above the surface, we can use our body weight for that. And the kneading will be much easier. The table surface is ideal if it's wooden and not coated with any treatments, no varnish, no oil, nothing. The surface should absorb a little bit of water so that the clay doesn't stick. No varnish, no oil, nothing. The surface should absorb a little bit of water so that the clay doesn't stick. If you don't have such a table at hand, you can use a sheet of plywood. We simply place this sheet on any stable table that suits us and begin to knead the clay here. But it's important to secure this sheet somehow, because if it's just lying on the table during the kneading, it will start sliding around in different directions, and that's not very good. There's a tool called a clamp. This is a piece that, it's like how meat grinders used to be attached to the table, you know? This clamp fixes plywood similarly. Overall, 1 clamp is enough. At the corner, it's secured well. The sheet is secure for kneading clay. So here at the corner, we've secured it well, and that's it. And our sheet no longer goes anywhere, and we can knead clay on it. It's also really great to knead clay on a gypsum board. If you have a gypsum tile, that's it. The ideal option is if you want to knead the clay and reduce its moisture a bit at the same time. So the clay is too wet, it sticks to your hands, right? So it will stick to the table as well. We take the gypsum and knead it on the gypsum. Gypsum absorbs some of the moisture, making the clay more or less dense. And then we can continue kneading on a wooden surface. It's a really handy thing, and it often happens that when you take the clay out of the bag, it's all very wet and sticky on the outside, but normal on the inside. So we take it, knead it a bit on the gypsum, and then we move over to the table. The clay comes out of the bag, and it's all very wet and sticky on the outside, but normal on the inside. So we took it, kneaded it a bit on the gypsum, and then we move over to the table. We take out the clay, and you can see that it's quite wet. Here, as I said, it sticks a lot to your hands. And that's why at first it will stick to the table. That's normal. Even to that table, which absorbs water well, it will still stick. We need to understand that if we knead the clay in one part of the table, then after a while, the wood, it will absorb moisture and the clay may still stick in that spot. If this happens, we can simply move a little to the left or right and continue. Knead the clay on a drier spot and everything will be much more comfortable there. To get the hang of kneading, let's take a small piece. Well, let's say around 1 kilogram, 1.5 kilograms at most, and let's try to work with that. I'll show you the simplest and most effective way to knead clay, which is easy and quick to learn and can be applied in practice. We take a piece of clay and shape it into a cone. You can just tap it lightly so that one end is wide and the other is narrow. You can't always do this, but at the learning stage I suggest starting with this shape. Starting with this shape is the most convenient. Place the clay so that the pointed end is facing you. And now we are doing very simple actions. The first action, we lift the clay to the very tip and place our hands on both sides. We placed our hands on both sides and now we need to cover it with our fingers. The top, I'm not just holding the clay from the top, I'm holding it from the sides and the top at the same time, and now I'm making one simple move. I press down on the clay just enough so that the tip stuck to the surface of the table. And now I'm shifting the clay. I'm pushing not straight down, but I'm pushing along this trajectory. And the clay has lowered for me. Has lowered. Now I lift it back up to the very tip and place my hands on both sides again, covering it from the top. Now the tip is pressed against the surface again. Table. I'm pushing the clay. Again, I'm not pressing straight down, but on a downward trajectory forward. Once again, my clay has lowered and I'm lifting it back up. And so, we pushed, lifted, placed, covered, pushed, lifted, placed, covered. We are kneading the clay, and in the process of kneading, we are forming a head like this. The kneading method is called bull's head. And let's make the eyes here so that it's really clear. There are two main working parts. The first part is the cylinder. Here we can see the cylinder onto which this clay is wrapped like a little tail. We have a cylinder. There's a little tail, and this tail, the clay from the tail, is wrapped around the cylinder. It turns out to be infinite. What's happening right here? After each movement, the clay thins out right here. Each layer, as it wraps around our cylinder, becomes very thin. And if there are any air bubbles or inconsistencies here, they all get removed. The kneading process will consist of 3 stages. We've started the first stage. Then we need to complete this stage. So we need to make this out of that. Cylinder, we need the tail to wrap completely around this cylinder. What am I doing? I take each subsequent movement and make it lighter. So I was pushing with a certain force. Right now I'm pushing just like before, but a little lighter. I pushed, and you can see the little tail. It's become smaller for me. Its size has decreased on its own. So part of the clay has transferred to the cylinder. I lift the clay again. I push again. And my little tail has become smaller again. And in the end, I make the movement lighter, lighter, even lighter. You can see that there's practically no tail left. And in the end, this tail of mine disappears. This tail of mine disappears. And so you get this kind of shape. After that, I turn it at a 90-degree angle. And I start over. We lift the clay to the very tip, place our hands on the sides, cover it. From the top, press down lightly and start pushing the clay away from us. We pushed, we lifted it, placed our hands on the sides, covered it from the top, pushed and lifted. Our task is to control the top part and the clay on the side at the same time. Why do we need to control the clay? On the side, if we don't hold it here, first of all, these layers, you see, they don't compact very well here. And there can be some air pockets between the layers that later on, they will play to our advantage during the break. So, we end up creating new bubbles. That's one point. And the second point is that when we don't control the clay here, it just becomes uncontrollable. It starts to expand stretching out here to the left and right, and our bull starts to grow such horns. And to prevent that from happening, we control the clay from both sides. We pushed, we lifted, we pushed, we lifted. And at some point, my hands spread apart and stayed at that level. And I control the clay from the side and from the top. And it turns out to be such a shape. The turning of the clay is very important for us. Because during this turning process, when we finished the cylinder, we turned it around. The clay starts to shift in the opposite direction in another way. The clay on the outside is moving well here, but right in the middle, at the axis of this cylinder, the clay hardly moves. And when we turn it around, we can mix much more effectively. Notice if my hands are moving right now. Yes, they are moving, but I'm not moving them. So the hands themselves are not involved in the movement process. They move in space because I'm shifting my body weight. I stand in such a way that one leg is in front and the other is behind. And I shift my weight from one foot to the other, closer and further from the table. And accordingly, my hands also move because of that. The idea is that during the mixing, the hands act as levers. The physical strength of the hands doesn't play a role here. Hands as levers. If I knead the clay like this, I'll be able to do it, but my hands will get tired pretty quickly, and because of that, I won't be able to knead a lot of clay. You understand, right? If I straighten my hands, they shouldn't be completely straight. They should be slightly bent. And we use our body weight to knead the clay. Here, I'm shifting my body weight. The clay, moving it easily, pushed it, lifted, pushed, lifted. And by shifting my body weight, by using my hands as levers, I can do this very efficiently. How many movements do I need to make to knead the clay? As levers, I can do this very efficiently. How many movements do you need to make to knead the clay? There's this number 100, which is the average indicator. If we make 100 movements, then the clay obviously should be very good. Can knead it, but if it's a mass from a vacuum-sealed brick with the moisture we need, we don't need to remove the air from it right away. We don't need to achieve uniformity. It's enough just to wake it up a bit. And there, maybe 40 movements will be enough. We don't need to achieve uniformity. It's enough just to wake it up a bit. And there, maybe 40 movements will be enough. That's what you did there. In one direction, you make 10 movements, then turn, and in the other direction, you do another 10 to 15 movements, turn again, and that's it. And your clay is mixed, it's been awakened, and you can start working with it. But if it's some kind of processed clay, then it's likely to contain a lot of air. And your clay is mixed, it's been awakened, and you can start working with it. But if it's some kind of processed clay, then it's likely to contain a lot of air, plus it's very uneven. But if it's some kind of processed clay, then it's likely to contain a lot of air, plus it's extremely uneven. And for such clay, it might take much more time to get it to the state we need. The standard scheme is like this. If we take an average clay, we make 30 movements. We can even count not 30 but 33 for accuracy. We made 33 movements and that's it, in total, into a cylinder. We turned it 90 degrees and then we make 33 more movements. And so after 2 turns, we'll end up with 100 movements. What's important to understand? During the kneading process, the surface of the table absorbs water from the clay. Our hands are warm, and from the heat of our hands, the water in the clay also evaporates. And especially during practice, when you're training to knead the clay, it can happen that by the time you've kneaded it, it's already become too hard to work with. So if you see that the density of clay, it has increased, it has become loose and non-plastic, we need to put it back. Put it in a bag, maybe wrap it in a damp cloth, soak it, and then take new clay for practice.